Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm creating a dating simulator because I am once again single on Valentine's Day. It is once again almost Valentine's Day. Last year around this time, I created a dating sim or visual novel. It was really short and simple, but I had fun making it, so I thought I would do it again this year. If you don't know what a visual novel is, basically it's a game with pictures and dialogue, and you can choose different options to get different outcomes. Last time I used the app Cocho. It is a really nice and easy to use app for creating visual novels. Plus it's free, so that's nice. However, this time around I wanted to try using a different program, mostly because this game will be much longer and have 2 characters you can get to know instead of just one. So for this game, I'll be using the software TyranoBuilder. I got it on Steam when it was on sale for $10. It's usually $15, which isn't too bad if you want to be able to make a game without knowing any coding. I know a little bit of coding because I've tried to learn about it over the years, but I don't know very much. So now I'll be walking you through my creation process. As I'm talking, you'll be watching me create the art for the game. So step 1 was to write the story of the game. The plot for my game is pretty simple. You are hired as a temporary worker at a cafe. At the cafe, you will be working with the 2 male leads, Finley and Samson. By the end of the game, you'll end up with a Valentine if you make the right choices. Also, if you're wondering why I chose a cafe for the setting of my game, it's because I have 2 characters, Esther and Clarence, who run a cafe. I've been wanting to use them for something, and I thought their setting would work well for this game. Clarence doesn't get to appear, but we do see Esther. Samson is Esther's younger brother, and Finley is Clarence's younger brother. I broke the game up into different days. Like on day 1, you get to know Finley and Samson. On day 2, you are late for work, and so on. The days will be different based on what the player chooses. Like on day 3, you can choose to invite Finley to go to lunch with you, or you can invite Samson. One of the trickiest parts about writing the story is trying to not have important dialogue locked behind certain choices. Like if I want a character to reference something in earlier dialogue, I need to make sure it's dialogue the player saw. This was kind of hard for me to wrap my head around since it's not something I'm used to doing. I'm used to writing stories where a person sees all the dialogue, not only some of it. Also, it was a bit tricky to think of multiple dialogue options, but having different dialogue based on the player's choices is part of the fun. So after writing out my story, it's time to bring all of the text into TyranoBuilder. I start with adding dialogue first because in visual novels, the dialogue controls the flow of the story and how it plays out. So once I get all that done, I just need to add the visuals and all that stuff. Before I show how I add the text, I want to mention that I have the theme for my game set to cherry blossoms. To change the user interface theme, you can go to Game Settings and UI Themes. I wanted to make my own theme, but I ran out of time, so I just stuck with this one. It looks nice, so it'll do. Anyways, adding text in TyranoBuilder is pretty simple. First, drag in the Show Text tool. This will make your text appear. Then I drag in the text tool and fill it with my dialogue. The text boxes have spots to show who is talking. To fill the area with a name, put a hashtag by the speaker's name and then put the dialogue below it. To preview the game, I right-click and then click Preview from here. And ta-da! We have dialogue. This is much easier than coding it yourself. Another big thing of the dialogue process is the branching buttons. This is what the player will click to choose what they want to do. This part gets a bit tricky, but once you learn the process, it's not too bad. So when adding branching buttons, I want to make the dialog box go away by dragging in the Remove Text tool. I then drag in 2 branch button tools because I want 2 buttons to appear. The first button will be yes, and the second button will be no. I click on the Position tool to place the buttons and pick what they look like. There are multiple button options, so you can choose which ones you like best. Also, make sure to click Accept to save your changes. Also, I found it's better to change the size of your buttons over here. For some reason, it won't save the size if I change it in here, but that may be a glitch I'm just running into. Also, make sure to drag in the Stop tool under the buttons. This will make the game stop and wait for the player to click on the button. This is very important. If you don't add this, the game will keep going even though the player didn't pick a button yet. So yeah, make sure to put the stop. Okay, so we have buttons, but how do we make them go to different dialogue? To make the buttons know where they need to go, we need to use the label tool. So I'll make 2 labels, one called yes and one called no. Now that the labels are in place, we need to make our buttons target the labels. So I go to my buttons and make the target be the label I want them to go to. So the yes button targets the yes label and the no button targets the no label. Under each label, I will add the show text tool because we made our text hide when the buttons popped up, so we need to show the text again. Then I'll add some different text under each label so we get different dialogue depending on what we choose. Now let's test to see if it works. So if I choose yes, I will be taken to the dialogue under the yes label, but then it goes to the dialogue for the no option as well. This happens because there's nothing telling the game it needs to skip this dialogue, so we need to add that. To make the game skip the no dialogue, I need to add a jump and a new label. I'm going to add the jump under the yes option dialogue. Like the name suggests, jumps will jump to different areas that you tell them to go to. So after adding the jump, I'm going to add a new label. I'll call this dialogue skip. Like with the buttons, I need to make the jump target the label so it knows where it needs to go. So I select the jump and make it jump to the label dialogue skip. I'll add some text under the label to make sure it works. And now when we pick the yes option, it doesn't also go through the no option dialogue. Yay! So basically when I was adding the dialogue for my game, I just kept repeating the process I just showed you of adding text, branching buttons, labels, and jumps. Honestly, adding the text was probably the longest part of the process because apparently my game has over 4,000 words. I didn't know that until I was writing the description of my game. So yeah, there was a lot of dialogue to add. Also, something to keep in mind when adding dialogue is to think about where you want your characters to change their expressions. When I first started adding dialogue, if a character talked for a long time, I would add their dialogue all in one text box. But this doesn't work well if you want the character to change expressions while talking. So when adding text, I would think about the faces the character would be making, and if I felt like their expression would change, I would break up the text into different text boxes. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I have my game broken up into days, and each day has its own scene in TyranoBuilder. It's good to break things up into scenes because it's easier to stay organized and manage labels. To go from one scene to another in the game, I add a jump to the end of each scene and set the location to the scene I want to play next. Oh, also, something I forgot to mention is at the start of the game, Esther will ask you what your name is. I made it so that the player can input their name and their name will appear in the text boxes. It's a bit complicated, so I won't take the time to explain it here. I followed the tutorial on the TyranoBuilder website, so I'll put a link to that in the description. So after many hours of adding in the text, it was time to add the visuals. I was really excited about this part. But first I want to thank the sponsor of this video. Shout out to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning and wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. I love Skillshare because it has so many helpful classes. Like one time I was trying to learn how to animate in After Effects. I had no idea what I was doing. But then I found the class Animate Your Illustrations with After Effects by Manon Luart. This class was super helpful, and because of it, I was able to make this animation. I couldn't have done it without Manon's class. Skillshare is also ad-free, so you can stay in the zone while you're exploring new skills. Has new premium classes launched each week, so there's always something new to discover. And their entire catalog is now available with subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So go join Skillshare today, and thank you so much again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So the first visuals I decided to work on were the backgrounds. Honestly, I was trying really hard to find some nice pre-made backgrounds so I wouldn't have to make my own. And I did find a few, like this pantry background on the Clip Studio Paint asset library, and these backgrounds from MyVis Paint. But I did have to make a lot of the backgrounds myself. For the cafe, I actually ended up buying a 3D model. I don't usually spend money on 3D models because I'm cheap, but this game was taking me much longer to finish than I was expecting, and I was starting to run out of time, so I was desperate, and I bought the cafe 3D model. However, I'll know I'll be able to use this model again in the future for my webcomic, so it will definitely come in handy. My first visual novel took me a few days of work to complete, and because that game didn't take me very long to finish, I thought this one probably wouldn't take me too long, even though it's way longer and has double the amount of characters. I had to really start rushing towards the end because I was running out of time and I wasn't really able to work on anything else. So sorry to people that read my webcomic. The next chapter will be coming out later than I was hoping because I haven't been able to work on my next door neighbors for like the past 2 weeks. I kind of miss working on it. But yeah, this game probably took me over 40 hours to make. I kept wondering if I should give up. But at the same time I was pretty far into the process, so I thought I should see it through to the end. Adding the backgrounds into TyranoBuilder is pretty easy. I go to the Assets tab, make sure I'm in the background area, and click Add File. I made a new folder for my backgrounds, and then just drag and drop in all the backgrounds. Then to change the background that's displayed, I drag in the Change Background tool and then select which background I want. Also, this controls how long your backgrounds take to fade in. I want my backgrounds to fade in and out, so I leave it as it is. So yeah, I just went through my game and added where I want the backgrounds to change. Now it's time for characters, finally. I was really looking forward to drawing the characters. So you've been seeing me work on Esther's rig. What I mean by rig is that I've drawn different facial features I can switch out to make different faces without needing to do a ton of redrawing. I can instead mix and match to make new expressions. Esther's rig is simpler than Finley's and Sam's because she doesn't appear for very long, so I don't need her to make very many faces. However, I needed Sam and Finn to make more faces, so I made much more options for them, like different iris options, mouth options, and eyebrow options. I also drew 2 different bodies for each of them so they will switch poses instead of just standing there. I thought it helped show their personalities a bit more and it would be more interesting. It was fun making their different expressions. Finley and Sam are basically total opposites, so I like trying to figure out how they would display the same emotions. After I finished the characters' art, it was time to add the characters to the game. Like with the backgrounds, I go to the Assets tab, then go to Characters. I type in the character's name and click Add. Then I just need to add all the art files for his different expressions. To make Finn join the scene, I drag in the Join Scene tool. Then I select Finn from the drop-down menu and choose which art I want to display. Like with the backgrounds, this controls your characters fading in and out. A lot of times I set this to 0 unless the character is joining the scene for the first time or the scene is ending. To make Finley change his expression, I drag in the Change Expression tool. It has Finley selected by default, so I just select the expression I want him to change to. Also, by default, the art will fade in and out when changing expressions. I didn't really like this, so I would set it to 0. If I want Finley's art to go away, I drag in the Exit Scene tool. I make sure it's set to Finley, and I don't want him to fade, so I set it to 0. So yeah, that's how you add characters to a scene. It's pretty simple, but also very tedious. Adding the character's art to all of the scenes took me a good amount of time. Okay, we have the dialogue, we have the backgrounds, and we have the characters. But now I need to make it so that the player will get different endings based on their choices. There are multiple endings. The perfect endings are Finley or Sam ask you to be their Valentine. The good endings is you ask them to be your Valentine and they accept. And the bad endings are you reject them or they reject you. So to make this work, we need things called variables. If you know any kind of coding, this will sound familiar to you. Basically, a variable is a value that can change depending on conditions or information passed to the program. So I'm going to go to variables under the game settings and make new ones. They will be HP Sam and HP Finn. This will track how many heart points the player has with the character. Like for example, on day 2, the player can choose to work with Sam that day or to work with Finley that day. The player will earn a point with who they choose to work with. To make the player earn the point, I drag in the process variable tool. I pick the variable I want to change the value of. In this case, I want to add 1. So I add the process variable tool to each part of the game where a player can earn points. For example, if the player earns 3 points with Finley, they will get the perfect ending for Finley. But now we need to make it so that the game actually checks to see if the player has these 3 points before it will take them to the special ending. To do this, on the final day of the game, I added all these jumps. Remember, jumps will make us go to different scenes. In this case, the jumps will only jump if a certain condition is met. This jump will make us go to Sam's perfect ending, but only if the variable HP Sam equals the value 3. If the player does not have 3 points of Sam, it will check if it can execute any of the other jumps. So yeah, that's how you can make your variables work. You use jumps to jump to certain scenes if certain conditions are met. Okay, now it's time for finishing touches. I added intro screens to each day. I basically just made this a background that switches in at the start of a day. I made it so the player needs to click to continue. I did this by placing a clickable area and making the area the entire screen. Also, I made a target a label so that it would go to that label once the player clicks. Next was adding music. This sounds simple, but it gave me major problems. So everything I was reading made me think that TyranoBuilder doesn't support MP3 files for audio. So I used a converter to change my files to OGG files. These are supported by TyranoBuilder. However, OGG is not supported by iOS devices. Because of this, when I kept trying to play my games on my iPad, it kept freezing and would stop working. However, it took me a while to learn that it was because of the music. I was trying all these different things to make it work on my iPad when it was just the audio file type. So to fix this, I made all my audio files into M4A audio files instead of OGG. Thankfully, this worked. I was really scared the game wouldn't work for Apple users, but thankfully I was able to figure it out after a few hours. So now we have brought everything together. Text, backgrounds, characters, music. It's done. Oh, but excuse me while I go play through the game like 20 times to find any errors. Play testing my game was also tedious. I needed to test each option to make sure I led the player to the right text and all kinds of other things. Knowing me, I missed something, so if you find any major mistakes on your playthrough, please let me know. Oh, also I made something kind of cool. There's now an image gallery where you can unlock art from the game. I just followed a tutorial I found on YouTube. I'll put a link to it in the description. Also, I put a good amount of time into the special art you get for the perfect endings, but I won't show it to you because I don't want to spoil it for you if you play the game. So yeah, I hope you get to see them. Okay, so now it's time to export my game. I decided to have my game be playable through web browsers. I figured this would be the most accessible for all of you. The downside of HTML games is that they do load a bit slow. On my computer it's pretty fast, but on my phone it does load a bit slower. But like I said, I feel like it's the most accessible for all of you to play, so I decided to go that route. Once I export my game, I make it a zip file. I make it a zip file because I'm going to be uploading my game to a website that will be hosting my game. I'm going to make my game playable through the website called itch.io. Itch is a website for indie game creators to share their games. So I uploaded my zip file onto there, and now you can all play the game. It's finally done. Also, the game is free, so you don't need to pay any money to play it. You can find it on my website, lovetodrawmanga.com. Just go to the More drop-down menu and find My Valentine. You can also play it directly on itch.io. Just go to lovetodrawmanga.itch.io/myvalentine. There are also links in the description. Also, here's a little preview to show you the game in action. So yeah, that's my visual novel. It was a lot of work and a bit confusing at times, but I learned a lot and I did enjoy making it. I feel like the final result is kind of cool. I hope you all will check it out and let me know what you think of it. Before we end, I want to thank my super lovely patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Happy Valentine's Day! Bye!